few other organizations have partnered with us today. I'm Yanisa. I'll be your MC for the evening. Yeah, thank you. But first of all, if you can vote, have you already voted today? If you haven't, you have like an hour-ish left to rush to the polls. And I also wanted to say hi to people on the live stream if people are watching. So we're here today because we know that even though we all voted if we could, it's not going to be enough for the issues that we're fighting for. And we have a bunch of speakers ready to tell their vision of the world that goes beyond the ballot box. So I'm going to introduce you to Nate first, who is an organizer, activist, and photographer with the Freedom Fighters Coalition.
How's it going, everybody? Welcome. Thank you, Nisa, for the introduction. Thank you, Kolya, for all the setup work. Thank you, me, for also setting up the sound system. And my friend Nova, who's running sound for us. Thank you, guys. I'm an activist and organizer with the Freedom Fighters Coalition. For those of you who don't know, which I meant is very few of you, Freedom Fighters Coalition is a pretty new organization where we consider ourselves anti-capitalist, anti-racist, and anti-hate. And those seem pretty broad and simple, but I promise you that there's some nuance under the covers there. The benefit to having such broad and simple demands like that, or unifying concepts, is that it doesn't at first come across as radical. And we think that might be a good thing, that the revolution shouldn't be seen as radical.
Welcome.
That's not to say we shouldn't be having
I like camera.
demands that are clear, cut deep, and are arguing for very specific things. But that those very specific things shouldn't be seen as radical. It shouldn't be seen as radical in a pandemic to believe in science. It shouldn't be seen as radical where our greatest threat to the future of the globe is climate change, to believe that it exists. These are simple facts. It shouldn't be seen as radical that women should be the sole arbiters of decisions about their own bodies and reproductive health. Fellow men out there, we need to normalize vasectomies that are reversible as a simple and safe way to control birth control. This is a simple thing that shouldn't be radical. That should be equalizing the load. Similarly, the state should have no right to infringe on anybody's body autonomy. Simply put, trans rights are human rights. This is not radical. Similarly, to make all of this happen, you need health care, the human right, and health care should not be tied to your employment. This is not radical. But these demands right now are seen as radical, and that's the problem. That's what we're out here to change, and we can only change that through unity. Through agreeing that disparate seeming causes are actually intersectionally connected. That shouldn't be radical. That should be basic. So, with this arbitrary framing device that I've come up with here on what's radical, it can be helpful to look at who might see it as radical. And that's pretty simple. It's moderate white America. I grew up in moderate white America, in one of the fields north of Boston, Topsfield. You might know our fair. It's about all we have because we're a pretty homogenous white town. There's not much going on there other than the 10 days of the Topsfield Fair every October that lead up to my birthday. And that's the problem. That we have so many people in moderate white America who are uncomfortable with these ideas that should be basic. It should be simple. As an example of moderate white America in Topsfield, just north of Boston, here in Massachusetts, my first and only role model from a young age who was a person of color was Tony on the Disney Channel show Out of the Box. If any of you remember that, I'm sorry, but that's another framing device I'm going to use for a little bit. Bear with me. Disney Channel is not radical. They would never put anything that challenges the status quo. They are a corporation. Corporations need to be torn down. But Out of the Box and Tony and Vivian were radical because they taught three important things. They taught very simply empathy, they taught problem solving, and they taught 4-year-old Nate Lampkin how to dream. That's what we're here to discuss tonight. How is it that just being empathetic to your neighbor is anti-capitalist? Well, I'll tell you. Reaching out and asking for help when you need it is anti-capitalist because it reduces your dependency on the systems. It reduces the dependency on the dollars in your pocket and the nickels and dimes it takes you to do your laundry. Similarly, reaching out to friends when you know they can't ask for help is an act of anti-capitalism. Love is an act of anti-capitalism because it fixes these systems while acknowledging how broken they are. Now, I'm not advocating a sugar-coated, candy-flavored version of a revolution that's easier to swallow for moderate white America. That's the opposite of what I'm saying. Well, what I'm saying is that when we can draw people into a conversation by stating what is basic, that is when we can make change. We need to encourage our less radical neighbors, friends, and family to be a little bit more uncomfortable sitting in their own discomfort. Because right now, the problem with everything is that moderate America is more comfortable with a broken system than they are uneasy with a revolution. When that revolution is basic, when that revolution isn't radical, and that's not a compromise on our demands, on what we're asking for, and the radical changes that we need to make, but it is a future that we can dream about, filled with empathy and love, and built together, so that it doesn't just look like 4-year-old Nate Lampkin in white Topsfield, Massachusetts. It looks like everybody. And the systems right now are only working for some when they need to work for all of us. That is why FFC, this thing on my mask, Freedom Fighters Coalition, is so focused on unity in the Boston scene right now. Because we believe that we can model and build communities where it's not radical to support each other. That is the goal, and we welcome other groups into that goal because they have ideas and demands that we can work towards. Approaching things intersectionally, approaching things from love, and approaching things in a radical way of de-radicalizing the revolution is our goal. And I'm so glad you're all here to share in that goal tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Nate. That was a really moving story, and thank you so much for telling your story. So that was Nate from Freedom Fighters Coalition, one of the main organizers of this community meeting. And for those who have just joined us or have trickled in, welcome. This is the Election Night Community Forum. And just a couple of logistics before we move on to our next speaker. We have food and some snacks and some hand warmers. I'm using one right now because it's super cold. And some hot cider over there next to that table. And we also, if you brought canned goods and saw that on social media, I think we're collecting it like right down here.
Thank you.
Yeah. So up next we have Maudie from Sunrise Boston. And the Sunrise Movement is a movement of young people basically trying to build an army of young people to stop climate change and also create millions of good jobs. It's also my organizing home, and you might have seen us around fighting for the Green New Deal, but we also fight for justice of other forms and are very proud of partnering with Freedom Fighters Coalition on this and many future actions. So here is Maudie.
Good evening. Thank you, Yanisa, and thank you to the Sunrise Movement and everybody who's come out today to continue our work towards creating the world that we want to have. So like Yanisa said, my name is Maudie, and I'll tell you a short story that leads to that. So early one fall evening, in Japan, where I grew up, when I was about 11 years old, on a backstreet sidewalk, I was walking home with a friend of mine named Julian. We were talking about the t-shirts that our teachers were wearing that day. They read in big, bold, white letters, "Gay? Question mark? Fine by me." I remember being so weirded out by that. This idea of supporting two men having sex, and I expressed this to Julian with the conviction of my Muslim upbringing. But as we turned the corner, down the road that led to my house, I looked up and I saw a familiar look in his eyes. It was familiar because it was the same look that I know that I'd had in mind so many times. All those times that I had been vilified on the basis of my faith. Julian explained to me that his brother was gay. And he explained just how hurtful it was to judge someone for their sexuality. Through his pain, he held me accountable. Julian and I remain friends to this day, and I am so immensely grateful for the way that he held me accountable. Because he believed that I could be a better person. In that moment, I experienced what I would learn many years later more formally. Confrontation is an act of care. Confrontation is an act of care. A few years later, when I was about 15 years old, deep in the space between my Muslim faith and my American identity, I had an eerily similar encounter with my mom. CNN was on, as was typical for evenings in our living room, and they were reporting on Obama's newfound support